Hopefully you didn't skip this topic. I know discussing types in a language is about as exciting as watching the grass grow, but understanding types is a critical part, and understanding how JavaScript works with types is critical. So first off, I need to mention that JavaScript is a dynamically typed language. Now, what exactly does that mean? Well, let me open the console here. In a lot of languages, you declare the data type as you're declaring the variable. For example, something like this. Declaring it as a Boolean, and you assign the value of true. Well, that's not the case in JavaScript. We're not statically typed like that. It's a dynamic type language, which allows us to do things like this. We set this variable equal to 9, and then a little bit later, we could assign a string to it. And it doesn't produce an error. In many languages, this would produce an error. We can then assign a Boolean to it. If I could type. We could assign an object to it. So dynamically typed language is exactly what JavaScript is. Now, you may have heard of TypeScript. And I just want to mention that briefly here. TypeScript is actually a superset of JavaScript that adds, among other things, strict data typing to the language. So when you declare a variable, you would declare the data type at the same time. Now, those that write in TypeScript must then compile their code to plain JavaScript. But it has become more and more popular over the years. So just so you're aware of that. So JavaScript is a dynamically typed language, but what types does it support? What types does it have? Well, there are 7 primitive types in JavaScript, and then everything else is an object. Now, by primitive, we simply mean that the value that it contains is not an object. It is a single value. When we think about objects, objects are a collection of values, but a primitive data type holds a single value. Also, something else to mention about primitives is that they are immutable, meaning they cannot be changed. Objects can be changed. Objects are mutable. So let's look at what those 7 primitive data types are. Boolean. Boolean is simply either true or false. Very simple. A string. A string is represented by anything inside of single quotes or double quotes. Both of those will create a string for us in JavaScript. And unlike some other languages, a string is not a sequence. Now, number. Now, the fact that JavaScript only has a single data type for number baffles some people that come to JavaScript from other languages. So a number in JavaScript technically is a floating point even if we express it without a decimal. So the number data type represents both the 5 and the 3.14. There's not separate data types for those. Undefined is the next data type. And basically what this means is that it's an absence of definition. Nothing has been defined here. This is a value that is assigned by the system. And I encourage you to keep it that way. In order to talk about that, I need to show the next one, null. Null is a primitive data type as well. And null represents the absence of value. But the thing that I want you to differentiate between undefined and null is that undefined is set by the system, null is assigned by you. So if you want to assign something that represents that there is no value, use null. Do not assign something undefined. leave that to be assigned by the system. Then whenever you see undefined, you know that it is because of a lack of definition. There's nothing been defined earlier in our code for, say, a particular variable. Now, another case where we see undefined show up is if we have a function that doesn't return a value. Then undefined is basically the return value. You'll sometimes see that in the console. If you invoke a function in the console that doesn't return a value, you see undefined. Let me just show you that really quick. So if I set up a very simple function here, that's all it's going to do, console log. Now if I call name, we log to the console Steve, but also notice the undefined that shows up because it's not returning a value. So important difference between null and undefined. You assign null, let the system assign undefined. Next value, symbol. This was added in the ES6 standard, and this is actually a data type that is often used to add unique property keys to an object so that they won't collide with keys any other code may add to that object. And then finally, the newest primitive data type added to JavaScript is big int. And because this is a new data type, and because there's a special way to use this, I'll address this in its own topic a little bit later on. Now, with data types in JavaScript, we have a type of operator whose purpose is to return the data type of a value. Now, I want to look at that really quick for each of these. So if I go to the console and we do type of true, what's it going to return? Boolean. It tells us that this is a Boolean. Type of some string tells us it's a string. Type of a number tells us a number. And this could be an integer or a decimal number. Now, of course, type of undefined is going to return undefined. But notice what happens here. And this can be confusing. Type of null returns object. Why does it do that? Well, this is actually a mistake in JavaScript. And it's a mistake that was perpetuated long enough that they're now not able to fix it because there's so much code written that relies on type of null returning object that it would break code. And so it hasn't been fixed. This bug has been perpetuated since the very beginning of JavaScript. And it's something you need to be aware of when you're using the type of operator. Now let's look at a symbol. That does return symbol for us. And then finally, this big int, I'm going to copy this integer number so I don't have to type out that many. And that returns big int. So we get the type of for each of these values. We get the data type with the exception of null, as I mentioned. And those are the 7 primitive data types. Everything else in JavaScript is an object. And we're going to talk about that in more detail next. So let's move on.